I thought I'd dress appropriately today wearing my Rainbow Books t-shirt to talk about rainbow books. I definitely don't have as many books as other booktubers. I just recently did a big purge that I think dropped it below 300, which, don't get me wrong, I know that's a lot of books compared to the average person, but certainly compared to some of the libraries you see on here, it doesn't feel like that much. And while I do not organize my shelves in rainbow order, I just don't remember covers well enough for that to ever work for me. But what that means is that I never get to appreciate the beautiful rainbow of books that I do own. So today I wanted to go through my favorite books of every color that I own. And then I was like, that doesn't feel like enough. I want to do another rainbow of books that I'm most excited to read, because I have so many books on my shelves that I have not read. More than half of the books on my shelves, I would say. So I thought, let's do those two rainbows. So we're going to start with the first rainbow, which I'm going to try to hold up for you without dropping everywhere. There we go. So you'll notice this one at the beginning is like kind of multicolored, but I counted that as my pink one. My channel, my rules. But just a couple of other disclaimers before we start. First of all, I am not talking about these are the covers that I think are prettiest. Second of all, I have done this based on the spine, not the overall cover. So there's a couple of examples in here, I think, where like the front cover isn't necessarily the same as the spine cover. I did it based on the spine because that's what you see when you're looking at shelves. And of course, we're going to start at the pink end with Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is my favorite romance book of all time. I love Emily Henry. She is a can't miss author for me. And Beach Read is about January Andrews, who is a women's fiction writer, and she is suffering from serious writer's block. And it's around the same time that her dad has recently passed away. And she found out, I think at his funeral, that he had been having an affair for years and years and years, and he has left her his lake house, and she goes to the lake house because she doesn't have anywhere to go to try to overcome her writer's block. And while she's there, she realizes that the grumpy next door neighbor is her university rival and acclaimed literary author, Gus. And they're both suffering from writer's block, and so what they decide to do is swap genres for the summer. This book is impeccable. It's amazing. And honestly, even if the cover isn't like really pink, it's like kind of pink vibes, you know? It's the first romance that I recommend to people when they tell me that they're looking to get into romance. Definitely one to check out if you haven't already. Now moving on to red. Whether this counts as red or not, I'll kind of leave up to you. It almost looks more orange when I'm holding it up there, but the background of it is definitely red. So I've put it in the red, and that is You Again by Kate Goldbeck, which was marketed as a When Harry Met Sally retelling, and I have since learned is actually published Raylo fanfiction, but that describes like half of romance these days, so don't let that put you off. You Again is about two people in New York City who are frankly quite insufferable, and they meet each other for the first time when they are sleeping with the same woman, and over the next few years they run into each other in the most random and coincidental of ways until they finally give in and decide to become friends, and that friendship evolves. And I love this book because it is one of the best examples of like character arcs in romance that I have seen. The way you go from just despising both of these people to desperately rooting for both of them individually and as a couple, masterful. This book was so swoon-worthy. Is one of the best romances I've read in a while. One of my favorite books of last year. Absolutely worth your time. Another one that I would recommend to people who are looking to get into romance, but also a really good one that's different from a lot of the other romance that's being published. Not to be too not like other girls, but it is very different than a lot of other romance that is out there. And so even if you are a seasoned romance reader, this may be a good breath of fresh air for you. Now on to what's truly orange, and that is really good actually, by Monica Heisey. Monica Heisey is one of the writers of Schitt's Creek, and this book is that kind of funny, very like millennial humor. It's about a woman who at the very beginning of the book goes through a divorce, and she just like slowly loses her mind. She is so anxious and so lonely and so unsure of herself, and just the hijinks and misadventures and misguided self-exploration are hilarious. There's like a really interesting combination that I think is exactly my style of humor. Combination of like actual jokes, like bits, and also just hilarious references, like super specific references. And it's the kind of book that I feel like is like Marmite. You're either gonna love it or hate it. I've seen a lot of people really hated this book, but I love it. If you like millennial humor, millennial references, try this book and see what you think. Then for yellow, and this is one where the front cover and the spine do not match, so I'll show you the spine first, is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, which is pink on the front, but we're going by the spine. So Spoiler Alert is about two fan fiction writers, one of whom has been writing fan fiction about this really popular fantasy show for years and years, and this popular fantasy show is a thinly veiled reference to Game of Thrones. She has been communicating with another fan fiction writer and being a critique buddy for this other fanfic writer for a long time, and it turns out this other fanfic writer is one of the actors in the show and part of the ship that she writes about. And he does not like the direction that the show has taken. And their paths collide in real life when she posts a cosplay image online and a bunch of people are making fun of her because she's plus size, and he decides he's going to ask her out on a date because he thinks she's hot and he wants to shut the trolls up. And then it kind of evolves from there. I read this book on a recommendation from my publisher, actually, and I had never heard of Olivia Dade, and I really loved this book. A lot of things that I was really worried about as they came up, like I don't tend to like the way that fat phobia and body issues and weight issues are brought up in books, especially romance books. I really did not mind the way that that played out in this one. In fact, I quite enjoyed it. I loved the romantic lead in this one, Marcus. He is fantastic. Incredible chemistry between these two. I also really like that in between the chapters, there are excerpts of scripts that he has either done or like turned down, and they're really funny. And they weren't the inspiration for the like interlude scenes in my upcoming book, but it was why my publisher suggested that I read this when I said I wanted to do that. They were like, oh, Olivia Dade did that in one of her books in a different way, so you should read that. And I absolutely loved it, and it definitely solidified for me that I like that as a literary device. Next up for green, and I don't know how this is translating on camera, but it is definitely green, and that is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is technically a sequel to Part of Your World, but it can definitely be read as a standalone. I do think you get more out of it if you've read Part of Your World, but it's not that big of a deal. And this is about Brianna, who is an emergency medicine doctor at a hospital in Minnesota, and she is up for chief of emergency medicine. But there's this new doctor at the hospital, Dr. Jacob Maddox, that is apparently also up for the position from his first day, which he did not know going into it. And because of that, they get off on massively the wrong foot. Abby Jimenez, I've said this before, and I will say it again, and I will say it until I'm blue in the face, is the queen of cinnamon roll boyfriends. Dr. Jacob Maddox is the epitome of a man written by a woman. Really early in this book, Jacob finds out that Brianna's brother needs a kidney donor, and he decides he's gonna give him a kidney, and then she also agrees, after finding out about that, to fake date him. Like I said, this is not really spoilers. It happens all within the first, I think, like 20% of the book. It's all kind of part of the setup because the fake dating is like the crux of what throws them closer together. But everything that like you think of as that's going to be icky about that situation, so the fact that he's doing this great thing for her, she feels obligated, what kind of dynamic is that going to create even on down the line once they are past that, all of that is addressed within the story. And I remember reading it thinking, I don't know about that, Abby. And then she showed up and she fixed it. Not even just fixed it, but like used it in a really powerful way. I trust Abby Jimenez. Her 3 most recent books are some of my favorite romance books ever. Now we're moving on to blue, and fair warning, I decided to do blue and indigo, even though I don't really know what indigo means, because I wanted to show you 2 blue books. It was literally for these 2 blue books that I made that decision, and the first of those is going to be This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. But it came out like 5 years ago and apparently had a, pretty low-key release. And then all of a sudden people have just latched onto it over the last year. This book is not for everyone. It's a little bit disconnected from reality. I don't normally like things that feel really surreal. I don't normally like things that feel overly ambiguous. And I'm gonna be honest, this is both of those things, and I love it anyway. It's so lyrical, it's so beautiful, it's so romantic, it's so different than anything else that I've read. If you have read something else like this, if you don't think that this is original, please tell me what else that you have read that's like this, because I want more. It's about these two like time travel agents from different factions, which sounds very like high sci-fi. It's not like that. It's almost more fantasy feeling than sci-fi, where one of them is from this like super futuristic, rigid kind of faction, and the other one seems to be from a more like nature-focused faction, but they're constantly just like chasing each other up and down the timeline, trying to change and then fix different events. And they're like leaving each other these messages as they foil one another's plans, and the messages go from like, haha, I beat you at the beginning, to these like passionate, beautiful love letters. I read this book in March of 2023, and if I haven't reread it by March of 2024, then I've been body snatched. And the other blue book that I had to include Indigo for is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. It's science fiction, and it's like very much science fiction, but it's like very relatable, very funny. Don't let the science fiction part put you off if you're not usually into sci-fi. In fact, I would say this is a really good place to start. If you have ever watched Hank Green's videos, this book feels like his videos. It's about a girl named April May, which is a bit silly, but it's fine. And she is on her way home from work in the wee hours of the morning after having worked really late, and there's just a giant like robot statue in the middle of Manhattan, and nobody else seems to have noticed yet that it's there. And so she gets her friend, who is like a video guy, to come shoot a video of her, and she like posts it to YouTube basically saying, hey, look at this thing, and like does a fake interview with it and calls it Carl. And it turns out that there are dozens of these statues that have popped up all over the world. People start calling them the Carls. For some reason, her video is the one that takes off out of all of these videos people have made all over the world. And she becomes like the person associated with the Carls, and the governments can't figure out what they are, where they came from. Are they an art installation? Are they aliens? Who knows? And then all of a sudden, weird things start happening involving these statues, involving April and her friends, and it gets wild from there. I love this book because it's not just about the science, not just about the adventure, but it's also about politics and friendship and religion and all of these things that feel like such macro, untouchable topics, and they're touched in such a relatable and yet impactful way. And that's why I say it feels like watching a Hank Green video, because if you've ever watched one of his videos, you know that that's kind of how it feels. He takes these big things that either feel like way too big to wrap your head around or like way too small to wrap your head around, and he makes them feel relatable and he makes them feel important. And he's done that in this book, and it's so good and it's so engaging and it's so fun, and I could not put it down. I was on vacation when I was reading this and I still couldn't put it down. I was like, you sure you don't just want to spend a few hours in the room this afternoon, babe? So that I could read this book. I love this book. I love its sequel. Please read this book. Now on to purple. We have a very weathered copy of Wuthering Heights. This is actually the first copy of this book that I ever owned. Focus. From high school. You can see the cover is like holding on for dear life. Yeah, I read this book when I was 15, 16 years old, and I have had this copy ever since. I now have a few more copies because I love it so much. Wuthering Heights is considered a romantic classic. A lot of people are like, God, the people in that book are terrible. How could you say that's a romance? I totally agree with you. I think that the people in this book suck. That is not why I love it. I don't love it because I think it's a great romance. I love it because linguistically and poetically, it just resonates with me. I think that the vibes are just immaculate. It's one of the first books that I ever read that has like dialect in it as well. One of the staff that they have at the house has a lot of dialogue, and it's written in like dialect. And I think it's an example of how language in this book is used so precisely and used to really further the plot and our understanding of the characters. And that's done for all of the characters, not just the one that's written in dialect, but for Heathcliff and for Kathy and for Linton and for all of them. The way that they use language is powerful and it's so evocative and I love it. I haven't reread it in a few years now and I really need to. This copy I have is purple. It's I'm gonna stop opening it because I want to hold on to this copy as long as I possibly can because it's one of my favorite books of all time and I've had this one for, God, more than half my life now. Oh, I don't like that I just had that realization. Speaking of things I've had for more than half my life, for black books, we have The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. This is the prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I have had this book since I was aged 11, which was the first time I read it. I've even got a little inscription in the front that says something really precocious about it being my favorite book. And if you find it, please contact me by either telephone or email, both of which are listed below. But feel free to read the book in the meantime. I was obsessed with it. From the moment I read it at 11 years old, I was obsessed with this book. How do you describe what The Hobbit is about to someone who has never heard of it? It is about a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. Hobbit is, hopefully you know what a hobbit is. It's like a very short agrarian person, mostly like a human, but small, big feet, can't grow a beard, lives longer than humans. Bilbo is like a very homebody kind of hobbit. All of them are homebodies, but he has this secret longing for adventure. There's somewhere in his family tree there was a hobbit that went on an adventure that's unheard of and scandalous. And all of a sudden Gandalf the wizard comes by and is like, we're gonna go on an adventure. And he's like, absolutely not. And Gandalf's like, okay, fine. And then invites all of these dwarves who are going on a quest over to Bilbo's house. And they start showing up to his house uninvited. He's like, what the hell are you doing here? And they're like, oh, you're the thief that Gandalf promised us. You're gonna come on this quest with us. And he's like, I'm who now? Oh, so good. And they go on this quest because the dwarves are from this place called the Lonely Mountain. And there's a dragon named Smaug who has taken over the Lonely Mountain and has all of their family treasure and their family home. And they want to go back. And so they go on this quest and they go through all of these fantastical places. They go through the dark forest, they encounter trolls and orcs, and they fly on the backs of eagles, and it just is so magical and so adventurous and so lighthearted and so fun. I don't know if you can tell from the way I'm talking about it, but I just love this book and I have so much nostalgia for this book. Genuinely my favorite book of all time, and the copy that I've had since I was 11 happens to have a black spine, so it is the black book that we're talking about. And then finally for white, I didn't do brown because I don't have a lot of brown books that I've read. But finally for white, I chose The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. And I think this might be my favorite Beth O'Leary book. It takes place over two timelines. The present day timeline is a group of friends that are on their way to a wedding, but they're not supposed to be traveling together because two of them are broken up. But one of the groups, their car breaks down, and so the other group has to take them. The two that have broken up, the past timeline is the story of them falling in love and getting together and sort of what happened between them. I think I mostly like it because it's really, really good at making the timelines feel really relevant to each other. The order in which information is communicated within this book is very intentional. The things that are happening in the past timeline are directly impacting the things that are happening in the present timeline. And the things that are happening in the present timeline are directly impacting your understanding of the things that are happening in the past timeline, or at least your appreciation of those things. So as a writer, I really like this to watch what other people are doing and how they're effectively communicating across multiple timelines. Now let's look at the books that I have in those colors that I haven't read that I really want to read. And I'm going to be honest with you, this rainbow is a lot more satisfying to me because all of the books are the same size. So we're going to start with pink again. And I'm going to be honest, I chose this one because I actually think it's one of two pink books that I haven't read. But this is The Animals in That Country. And I bought this recently on my trip to Hay-on-Wye with my friend Amy. I'll leave a link to the vlog of that trip in the description. Out on the road, no one speaks, everything talks. Hard-drinking, foul-mouthed Grandma Jean has never been good at getting on with other humans, apart from her granddaughter Kimberly. Instead, she surrounds herself with animals, working as a guide in an outback wildlife park. I think this is Australian, by the way. Then, a strange pandemic begins, sweeping the country, its chief symptom that its victims begin to understand the language of animals. Many infected people lose their minds, including Jean's son, Lee. When he takes off with Kimberly, Jean follows, with Sue the dingo riding shotgun. As they travel, they discover a stark, strange world in which the animal apocalypse has only further isolated people from other species. I'm like, that sounds weird, but also kind of fun. And it won the Arthur C. Clarke Award. So like, why not? Sounds great. Let's do it. Then for red, we have, and this is another one where the spine doesn't match the front, All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. This is one I've seen all over Book Talk, and it seems to be like a dark fantasy Hunger Games style situation. So you fell in love with the victors of the Hunger Games, now prepare to meet the villains of the Blood Veil. And it's about this like contest to the death, a tournament to the death, that basically every generation, 7 families have to name a champion to fight in this tournament. And the winning family gets control over the city's magic supply. That's all I know about it, other than the fact that people have been reading this and really loving it. Has one of those really annoying like TikTok stickers that can't be removed. It's just like printed onto the cover, which I hate, but I am excited to read that. Moving on to orange. I don't know if this counts as orange, but I'm going to count it anyway. And it also doesn't match the front, but that's Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is basically about a guy that's stranded in the wrong universe, branch of the multiverse, whatever, and he has to try to find his way back. There's a TV show of this coming out, and so I'd really like to read this before the TV show comes out, but I have seen some really bad reviews for it, so I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to think. I always judge a book by the blurbs that it has, and this book has been blurbed by 2 authors I've never read, 1 author that I love, and 1 author that I hate. So we'll see. For yellow, and this is kind of like an orangey yellow, but when it's all lined up, it looks yellow to me, and that is The Bodyguard by Katherine Center. This is about a woman who is a bodyguard to this guy because he has a stalker, and when his sick mom meets her, the guy pretends or asks to pretend like she is his partner, so that his mom doesn't know that he has a stalker. And so they basically fake date. I've heard great things about this book. Really excited. I've heard mixed reviews about Katherine Center's other book, but I've heard nothing but positive things about this one. So I'm excited to read it. Then at green, we have Kings of a Dead World by Jamie Mollart. And again, it doesn't match the front. And this is apparently about, and it doesn't actually say on the back, but I feel like when I got this book, I remember it being about a future society where like half the population sleeps for months and then the other half of the population sleeps for the other 6 months or something like that. So it like alternates, which sounds interesting. I have a couple of other friends who have this book and haven't read it. So my intention is to buddy read it with them, and I'm excited. Then for my first blue, which we'll just go with blue, is The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic by Brianne Randall. This one went viral last year on TikTok and Instagram because the author was marketing it as Gilmore Girls and Practical Magic kind of combined. And then every single book from that point on, publishers started comparing it to those 2 books. I've heard really mixed things about this now that it's out, but I'm still excited to read it because that concept still really appeals to me. I have heard that there is a massive like thing in here that should have had a big trigger warning and didn't, so I'm conscious of that, but I'm gonna read it anyway because personally I don't have a lot of like triggers that get in the way of things for me. Oh, it's basically about someone who has magic, but she has a curse of 4 heartbreaks accompanying that magic. So those 4 heartbreaks kind of show up in different ways throughout her life. For the other blue, which is just the spine, we have The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is the author of The Dead Romantics, which I read last year and enjoyed, and I am excited to read this one, which seems to me to be inspired by The Lake House, the film starring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, which I love. I've heard this is much, much better than The Dead Romantics, and I really enjoyed The Dead Romantics, so excited to see what the hype is about. Now, for purple and black, I have 2 different books that seemed kind of purple and kind of black. I'll let you kind of be the judge of that. So the order that I've gone with in the end was for purple, Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. Having said that the idea of practical magic meets Gilmore Girls really appealed to me, I've never actually read the book Practical Magic. I have seen the film multiple times. I have built the house in The Sims, but I've never read the book, and I'm interested to see how the book compares to the film, and maybe try to read this before I read The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic. The other one of those is The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers, which is the next book for me in the Wayfarer series. It's the 3rd book. I've read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and A Closed and Common Orbit, and now I'm excited to read this one. I picked it up when I was in Hay on Wye, and I don't know what it's about. When a freak technological failure halts traffic to and from the planet Gora, these three strangers are thrown together unexpectedly, with nothing to do but wait. Under the care of Ulu, an enterprising alien, and Tupo, her occasionally helpful child, the trio are compelled to confront where they've been, where they might go, and what they might be to one another. So the Wayfarer series started with Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which was about like a ragtag group of space travelers on sort of a mission together. A few of them are harboring secrets. Felt very much like Firefly fanfiction to me. The second book, A Closed and Common Orbit, takes a minor character and a semi-minor character from that first book and takes them into a completely different story. This book seems to be completely separate from those, which honestly I'm not sad about because I didn't like the second book as much as the first book. So really excited to see what's next in the Wayfarer series. And the stack is officially big enough that you can see it in the corner. And then finally for white, this is not actually white, but it is kind of like an aged white, and that is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Sorry, Assassin's Apprentice, no the. And this is book one of the Farseer trilogy. My understanding is that all of Robin Hobb's subsequent books in not just that trilogy, but the whole series, they're all chunky. And I heard great things about them, really wanted to read them, but I've got big book fear. So when I saw that the first one, Assassin's Apprentice, is smaller, I was like, oh, that's great. I can try it out, see how I get on without committing to a 1,000-page book. And this is very like high fantasy, sort of medieval-y kind of vibes. And honestly, I haven't read a ton like that. My fantasy reading has been a lot more along the vein of like book talk fantasy rather than like high fantasy like this. So I'm excited to dip my toe into it. And there you have it. That is both of our rainbows done. I want to know from you though, what are your favorite books from each of those colors that I did not mention? I want to know what I should be reading, especially a brown one. I didn't have any brown in here. So if you've got recommendations for books with brown covers, drop them in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and you can pre-order my upcoming book, You've Got Chainmail, which is out on the 15th of August, 2024. Pre-order links in the description as always. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.